Well, good afternoon. My name is Courtney Bankston. I am the Chief Strategy Officer at the Wichita Community Foundation, right smack in the middle of the USA in Kansas. One of the cornerstones of investments that we make in Wichita at the Community Foundation is the idea of making sure that news and information, dissemination and access are available to every citizen in our city. So I love the opportunity and thank MIF for bringing us together. And it's nice to be back in person and excited to share with you just a brief introduction of today's beginning afternoon speaker. So this session is titled A Focus on Storytelling with the Chicago Community Trust. And Daniel Ash is going to be speaking about the work that they're doing. He was most recently the Associate Vice President of Community Impact at the Chicago Community Trust. I know we've learned a lot from them and their work with On the Table at the Community Foundation. But I did want to highlight the very exciting news that Daniel is beginning his new journey as President and CEO of the Field Foundation later this month, which is really exciting news to see come across my email. So he's going to share with us the Trust's approach and strategy to supporting community organizing, journalism, and storytelling, all to advance equitable, livable, and resilient neighborhoods within the underinvested Black and Latinx communities in Chicago. So please welcome Daniel.
Thank you. So, as you just heard, I work as a philanthropist, and that's an honor. But truth be told, I've always dreamed of being a journalist. The reason why begins with my parents in Youngstown, Ohio. Every day, one of us children would go to the paper box and get the Youngstown Vindicator. We run back to the house. The paper would get split. My father would take the front half. My mother would take the other half. My father would get the paper. He was a spreader. He would spread it out, get a cup of Senka coffee, and he would pour through it. My mother, she was a folder. She would sit in the kitchen, she folded, just reading just like 1 inch at a time, one vertical at a time. She would pour through it. Growing up, I witnessed this every day. And it began to have an impact on me. I wanted to do it too, and I did. Us reading the paper together led to conversations. There was another paper that would show up at our house, and it was called the Buckeye Review. It was our local Black press, and that paper got the same treatment. And as we got older, the thought of appearing in the Buckeye Review was so exciting. I mean, it meant something to be featured, to be written up, as my mother would say, in the Buckeye Review. I share that story because I didn't become a journalist. I found my way to the University of Chicago, and as a graduate student, and as I was walking around the Hyde Park area, for those who know Chicago, I would see at the coffee shops all of the papers, the neighborhood press, the alternative, the school newspaper. On one of those trips to the coffee shop, I look down and I see a publication called the Good News Journal. The Good News Journal. I picked it up and I read the masthead, and it was very thin. And it was stated that the sole purpose of this publication was to publish good news about Black Chicago. Now, I was studying public policy. I was still working on my writing skills, writing those policy memos. But I mustered up the courage to call up the editor and publisher and asked if I could work for her. I was really nervous when I made that call. I'm thinking, I don't know anything about journalism. She was elated. She said, sure, come on down. So for a few months in my graduate school career, I had the opportunity to report news in our community, good news. What I was reminded of was sort of those moments reading the Buckeye Review. Like, the power of our stories brings us together as a community. People would be so excited to have a graduate student from the University of Chicago show up and write about their middle school graduation, the opening of a store. It was those moments that I sort of carry with me, like the power of our narrative, the power of story. So I share that because I bring that history sort of into the work that I've been able to co-construct, co-design with my colleagues at the Trust. So let me begin by making a very clear point. The Chicago Community Trust, we have an agenda. We set as our North Star goal, a very hairy, audacious goal, we want to close the racial and ethnic wealth gap. And we've created a number of strategic portfolios to do that. As we were developing the strategy, again, armed with this experience I had as a young person, as a graduate student, as a member of our community, I spent weeks advocating for this portfolio, which we call Building Collective Power. My thesis, my team's thesis is very simple. If you want to accomplish anything big in a community, in a city, in a state, a nation, you have to support community infrastructure. You have to support a community's ability to tell its story, to connect with one another. And our belief was that if we do this, we would have to be agnostic. So we wouldn't develop this portfolio and say, go organize and go write about the wealth gap. We made it very clear that we were going to support this portfolio and meet people where they are. This is our sort of equation. Connect people by supporting the organizers, the people who get people to show up. Support community voice. Support narrative, support the storyteller, support the documentarian. And then support the doing, the action. Our belief, again, was very simple, that if you do this, you create the conditions for trust in the community, and you also undergird civic infrastructure that pulls people sort of out of their homes and into the public square. And if we met them there and we achieved that, we could, again, coming back to the Trust, achieve our hairy, audacious goal by getting behind the people who would pick up our issue. I want to spend a few moments talking about the voice part of the strategy, the portfolio. I want to acknowledge that our portfolio is loosely divided into sort of 4 categories. And this is just how I think about it. I know I have some colleagues saying like, oh, I've never seen this before, but I was thinking about how do I talk about what we do? And we made the decision in developing the media and storytelling section of this portfolio to have a ecosystem strategy. Again, we wrestle with this idea, should we just fund local news? Should we fund the civic storytellers? Do we fund the arts? Do we fund the larger players, the larger media platforms? And we made the decision, after a lot of thought, informed by some of my colleagues here, to fund the entire ecosystem. We wanted to fund the narrators. We wanted to support the storytellers. We want to support the community platforms, the Buckeye Reviews. And we also want to support the amplifiers, the larger newsrooms and platforms that are so necessary for carrying a story across a large city like Chicago. I'm going to spend the next few moments sort of walking through elements of the portfolio. We could be here for 2 hours if I talked about all of the dynamic work that's coming out of the portfolio, but I want to highlight a few. The narrators, cultivate narrators sort of segment or category is one of the most, my boss would say, interesting aspects of our strategy, meaning that people didn't think it fit. Like, so for example, we support YCA, Young Chicago Authors. It's a sort of youth platform designed to help youth develop their voice through creative writing. They're well known for hosting a poetry slam, which was once named Louder Than a Bomb. That's not journalism. These are young people writing poetry, writing short stories. Why would we support them? We made the decision to support them because these individuals, these students, become our storytellers, become our community leaders. One example I want to share is that there's another program that we fund called The Tribe, and one of their most prominent commentators is a young woman who came through the YCA community. I met her there at an open mic one night, and now she's writing for a platform that's gaining national notoriety. Another point I want to make here when sort of supporting the narrators is that we have two grantees, Juneteenth Productions and Public Narrative, that we fund so that they can help other community leaders document and tell their own story. So Juneteenth Productions, a Black-owned firm, it's an LLC, it's a private business. She works with our organizers. She's helping our organizers develop stories, teaching them how to develop a podcast and how to have agency and own that story and actually share it themselves. So in addition to the other sort of traditional youth media programs, we wanted to fund entities in the ecosystem that helped our narrators sort of build their muscle, if you will, their capacity. Support the storytellers. Now, I want to begin by saying we made a commitment, again, to support storytelling for the sake of storytelling, particularly as it relates to Black and Latinx communities. Again, there was some pushback when we launched this because the idea was, or the thinking was, that we would only fund traditional journalism. We made the decision to fund the documentary sort of film groups. We made a decision to fund a program that you're going to hear about later, Obsidian, that's all about preserving our archives of the Black press, our pictures. We also made a decision to fund Folded Map. Tanika Johnson, she's the storyteller that leads Folded Map. Tanika is an organizer. She's a photographer. She's a storyteller. She's a community researcher. She had a brilliant idea to document housing segregation in the city of Chicago. The project, and I don't have the clip to play, we couldn't get that to sort of come through, but I want you to search it and I want you to sort of experience it online. The project is simple. She documented housing values across the city. If anybody who knows Chicago, she took the map of Chicago, which is based on a grid system, brilliant urban planning. She folds it right at the middle point, and she developed what she calls map twins. So someone on the south side of Chicago, historic Black community, where housing values are depressed, low. She paired them with their map twin at the exact same point on the grid on the north side. And she created the conditions for these people to get together. Now again, if you go experience Folded Map online, you'll see the power of this storytelling, the power of this work. What I want to point out here is that that story has been picked up by local, regional, national, international press. That story created a civic dialogue that we weren't having before in the city of Chicago. So again, funding, supporting the storyteller, the traditional filmmaker, like we saw earlier, the protagonist like Tanika, an organizer who wants to tell her own story. Funding that work is critical to the health of the entire ecosystem. And again, our belief is that that sort of drives, has the potential to drive what comes out of traditional newsrooms. We also wanted to strengthen the community platforms. And everyone in this room knows the disruption in our business, and so I don't need to go into that. But we made a conscious decision to support hyper-local Black and brown media. I want to highlight a couple aspects of that portfolio. One, we made a decision that I think philanthropy doesn't make enough. We made the decision to partner with another foundation, the Field Foundation of Illinois and MacArthur Foundation, to support the media and storytelling program that had already been stood up by Lolly and Kyra Kyles, Lolly Boeing, who's here, Kyra Kyles, who's not here, Angelique Power, my predecessor at Field. And quite frankly, when we were designing this portfolio, because I haven't spent that much time in philanthropy, I said, well, why don't we just support this other foundation? I didn't realize that was kind of like a big deal for a community foundation to actually send money to a private foundation and help them expand their program. I highlight it not just because it was breaking an orthodoxy that existed in philanthropy, but it became a pipeline for us, so like a feeder system. So many of the other organizations that you see listed on this slide, and there's some that aren't included, we discovered through the relationship with the Field Foundation. Like Cicero Independiente, right? A Spanish language sort of platform that serves Chicago's Latino community. We wouldn't have learned about them without this relationship. I've also heard, particularly from grantees, that supporting one program, particularly for the small ones, helped them. So they weren't knocking on multiple doors in the city of Chicago. They knew that there was a door and that there were resources there for them. So again, it's important to note that we have to think about how we do our business differently, and we attempted to do that here. I also want to highlight, as a program I mentioned earlier, the Tribe. Sorry. I want to highlight this because this is, again, another one of our for-profit grantees. This is a business created and owned by two Black women, one a journalist, one a filmmaker. And they're essentially the inheritors of sort of the legacy of the Black press, right? They're creating a platform for and by and for Black people in Chicago. And they want that platform to be one that interrogates life in Chicago, but also celebrates it as well. I want to note that I met with them recently and I asked, so what are your plans? You know, you have a brilliant idea here, and if you have your phones out, you should go check out their website. It's a brilliant site, tons of rich content. And so me putting on my marketing hat, I said, you probably could expand this and have a tribe in every major city in Chicago, in the nation. And they actually said, no, we're not looking to do that. We're cool. We want to keep serving this community. And I highlight that because there's a tendency to think of when you have a good business idea that scale is always the pathway. And for them, they were very much more like the woman who published the Good News Journal. They're very comfortable serving Chicago, and we should support and respect that. The last category I call secure the amplifiers. And now this may seem like a no-brainer, right? Because you have these big platforms. But again, when I was helping the trust get back into this business of supporting media, there were sort of two mindsets. One, we support public media, meaning the NPR platform, the public television platform, maybe a platform like the Chicago Reporter, all good platforms. But that's what we do. And we gave ourselves permission to support them. What we were able to do is think a little bit bigger. And I want to highlight sort of our support of the Chicago Sun-Times. And this predates the merger with WBEZ. You know, the argument when we designed the strategy is that if we want to reach people, we better go to the platforms where people are. And to this day, by sheer numbers, the reach of Sun-Times far exceeds WBEZ. Not just in terms of reaching audience purely, like just pure audience, but most certainly Black audience in Chicago. So the argument I made to our board, if we're serious about the work we do, we can't get too navel-gazing and selfish. We have to think about the audiences that we want to reach. Another platform I want to highlight here is Block Club Chicago. Block Club Chicago is a platform created by journalists for community. And what I'm very proud of there is that they've created a sort of neighborhood-centric platform, meaning that they have reporters assigned to very specific geographies. But they've been able to do that in partnership with legacy media. So one example is that when they sort of set up shop on the west side of Chicago, they didn't just show up. They're actually working in partnership with the historic Black newspaper on the west side of Chicago. That's important. So I think as we think about our work, we have to think about how to create those type of leverage points and connections. So what have we learned? You've heard a lot of this already today. We learned that collaboration is the new normal. When I worked at WBEZ years ago, the idea of newsrooms collaborating, it just didn't happen. Everybody was trying to beat one another, as you know. Now, there's a desire that we must collaborate in order to do our jobs and do it well. But two, and this is of critical importance, the larger platforms are much more willing to collaborate fairly and with shared power with the smaller platforms. And I think philanthropy can use this leverage even more to make sure that that's even more common. I won't spend a lot of time on the second point. How we sustain all this still is elusive, right? We still haven't figured that out. And I think we need to really, really work together across markets to think that through. And what I'm learning, and I don't mean this in a self-congratulatory way, is that the ecosystem strategy is working. Like the foundation itself is creating a context for relationships to build across the ecosystem. And that's important. I want to end, and I decided to end this talk by featuring the voices of two grantees. I spent the last week calling them up, a number of them up, and I said, you know, what do you want me to say? I've chosen two. I'll begin with first Hermine Hartman, who's the founder and publisher of Indigo, which is a now 25-year plus platform that has been celebrating Black life in Chicago the way the tribe is doing today. But she started up as a print publication, is now multi-platform. She made a very simple point. Like, we need to support more content created by the community for the community. And you can see the quote here. She made, I think, a very profound point, is that it was her publication, not the Tribune, not the Chicago Sun-Times, not WBEZ, that did the first full feature on President Obama when he was a state senator. Like, this platform was plugged into community in ways that the larger platforms have not been and may not ever be able to. The last quote I want to sort of share with you is from Jamie Calvin, the founder of the Invisible Institute. And his point goes back to a point that was made earlier. As philanthropists, we have to think about how do we underwrite autonomy in the industry. And the point that he was making to me, and it was made earlier, is that we have to disconnect, as philanthropy, our agenda from our journalism funding. He gets lots of offers to interrogate or investigate a particular issue. And he really wants resources so he can just build capacity to do what he does. And he wants us, and he's saying this on behalf of the entire portfolio, I believe, he wants us to trust that if they have capacity, they'll find the stories that need to be told. And if they do, civic discourse will be made healthier. Thank you.